Well, thanks very much, Stephen. That's a lovely introduction. And thanks to all of you for coming along to hear about this groundbreaking project that the four of us have all been involved with for some months now. I'm going to put my timer on because we're trying to allow ourselves the right amount of time each to do this presentation. It's a lovely cartoon that I found courtesy of the Tennessean in the United States. I may be leaving. Yes, I've been a monkey long enough. But who's speaking? Is it the monkey or is it the man from Tennessee? We can use this cartoon to start off some of our work in religious education relating to something we're going to tell you about today, the Scopes Monkey Trial, 100 years on. So since its inception in 1989, the Sea of Faith Network has been proactive in launching several educational projects and programs. Notably, in 2013, Solarity. Inspired by Don Cupid's book, Solar Ethics, Solarity provided online resources and detailed plans for religion and philosophy clubs, out-of-school hours clubs. 82 complete sessions are included for primary and secondary age students, providing a good model for those who wish to set up such a club, often taking children deeper into some of the big issues than the regular RE curriculum. CFA then linked with the Big Ideas for Religious Education project, led by former HMI for Ofsted Barbara Winterskill, and involving RE specialists from across England, as well as three of us presenting here today. The project has evolved into more or less complete programme for an education in religion and worldviews for 4 to 18-year-olds. And we believe it makes a considerable contribution to the subject of RE in schools. It's already been influential in several local authority agreed syllabuses and in the National Online Oak Academy. Today, we're looking at one of the units, or exemplars as we call them, developed for the Big Ideas for RE website. It was suggested by Mark Chater, former Ofsted inspector himself, former director of the Culham St Gabriel's charity, which is a major supporter of religious education in England. Mark noticed that in 2025 was 100 years after a teacher, John T. Scopes, had been put on trial for teaching about evolution, thereby contravening the Butler Act of the state of Tennessee that made it unlawful for any teacher to teach any theory that denies the story of the divine creation of man as taught in the Bible, and to teach instead that man has descended from a lower order of animals. In fact, it's 100 years ago this week when the trial finished on the 21st of July, 1925. The law was in fact repealed 60 years later, but in some states of the USA today, there remain permissions and protections for biblical creationist ideas to be taught in state-funded schools. In the original case, John Scopes volunteered to provide a test case for the law. He was sponsored by the American Civil Liberties Union when he did this. And the local civic leaders of Dayton in Tennessee, the little town where Scopes was a teacher, they wanted more publicity for their town, and they got quite a bit more than they bargained for. They encouraged two famous lawyers to fight out the case. William J. Bryan, a former 3 times presidential candidate, failed, who wanted to defend the literal biblical account of the world's creation, and Clarence Darrow, who thought it was time to challenge the idea that believing in the Bible meant not believing in the evolution of human beings as presented in Darwin's Origin of Species. Well, American media sensed the story. Science versus religion. It became the very first trial to be broadcast live on radio, first trial in the world to be broadcast live. And several plays and films of the trial have since been made. You may have seen the excellent Inherit the Wind, starring Spencer Tracy, and there have been a few remakes since then. At the end of the trial, which put literal interpretations of the biblical creation story on the stand, Scopes was found guilty. Of course, he'd clearly broken the law as it stood. And he didn't really need 12 days to establish that. The judge fined him the maximum $100, and this was later overturned on appeal on a technicality. And the journalists lampooned the locals as having been left behind by the 20th century. Perhaps this was where today's so-called culture wars began. People were presented with a choice. On the one hand, creation as described in the Bible. On the other hand, Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. So our unit, our exemplar that we've provided for schools, a term's work, introduces students aged 11 to 14 to the main issues so that they can understand the original debate and be brought up to date with both scientific findings and developments in thinking about the interpretation of religious texts. And this is where Big Ideas comes in. Over to Michael.
So can I say, first of all, it's absolutely wonderful to be here. I'm very, very pleased. And thank you for the extremely generous introduction. I probably ought to admit I've never been, and I am not, a fellow of the Royal Society. I was Director of Education of the Royal Society for a couple of years before it came to a slightly more sudden stop than we'd anticipated. If you can arrange me to become a fellow, I'll be very grateful. Happy to speak with you afterwards. This is my second CFA conference. I was at the 2009 one in Leicester, which I very much enjoyed. And I am aware that, as you said, there is a certain poignancy to this one now that Don has died. And I hope Caroline will allow me to say, I remember I went in 2005 to a very posh dinner of the great and the good in science. And luckily, they're often allowing sort of one or two science educators, which is my day job, at the Science Museum, back time. The reason was, as some people know, 2005 was the 100th year anniversary of Einstein's Ans Mirabile, when he produced 4 papers, each of which could arguably have won the Nobel Prize in Physics, and one of which was cited as the one that did. But the point is, for fairly obvious reasons, Einstein couldn't be there because he was no longer alive. So they got his chauffeur instead. His chauffeur from Princeton. So 400 of us sitting there. What a lovely, lovely man who makes most of you look as if you're in your youth. Told us one or two anecdotes which no doubt he lived on. So I'm a bit worried, Carol, you may be serving the same functions. Oh, so Einstein's chauffeur. You do that to me. I'm going to say something relevant at some point, Dave. That comment. But before I reduced to doing that, I do want to say that I trained for ordination in Cambridge from 1987 to 1990. And the first 2 years, I had a wonderful personal tutor, Michael Washorn, who was the Dean of Pembroke. And Brian and I got on so well that we each thought you kind of too much of a good thing. So we drew up a short list of people who perhaps might be asked if they'd be happy to tutor me for my 3rd year. And there were 3 people on the short list, and I can't, I'm afraid, remember who numbers 2 and 3 were, but you'll know perfectly well who number 1 was. Anyway, all 3 were considered quite unsuitable. So the request for your father to tutor me never even got to him because he got vetoed at a much earlier stage. Now, let's go on to a bit about big ideas in science and religion education. Big ideas is a very common sense phrase, and it literally means what it says on the tin. It's large concepts. So the idea is that we think of students having gone through a conventional school education, what might you want them 20, 30 years later to remember as some of the big ideas of the subject. And in my main subject, science, there was an increasing acknowledgement among us that this just frankly wasn't happening. The vast majority of students who go through school science see it as lots of little scattered bits and bobs. If you're lucky, they remember things like photosynthesis or the periodic table or Newton's laws or whatever, but they don't really see how these cohere. And these two academics, neither of whom I know, in the United States, J. McT and Grod Wiggins, came up with this idea of big ideas. And there was a wonderful science educator called Win Hulme, who's still alive pretty well. And Win is a very gracious, modest, generous person. And she got given one of these international prizes, which was a reasonable amount of money. And typical of her, she used the entire prize money to fly in. At that time, about 6 people from overseas, and there were about 3 of us from the UK, who ended up producing a document called Big Ideas in Science Education. It has proved surprisingly successful. There are countries that have completely reorganized their national curricula exclusively around big ideas. And at the moment, if the present review of the national curriculum really does change things, the new version of the national curriculum in England is going to be organized around these big ideas. And I think it's because people who are not scientists can suddenly see, oh, I see. And evolution, roughly speaking, is one of the big ideas in biology. I was the person who wrote the biology big ideas. Now, that was 2010 that Wynne and her group published it. And fast forward, Barbara, who's already appropriately been lauded, got together a group of experts in religious studies and RE education, and very wisely, I think she really was wise, decided she wanted somebody, to be honest, to chair it who was not in that world. Because I'm not in the world. I didn't know Dave and Denise before that, or I think anybody else on the group. But of course, I'd been in the science big ideas group, so I had a sort of vision for what big ideas might do. Oh, we got locked up in Dartmouth. Didn't we? So it was Dartmoor. Dartmouth is I'm short of ski. Dartmouth is in New Hampshire. We got locked up in Dartmoor in a wonderful farmhouse for about 3 days and began to draft. And then actually a very large proportion of subsequent work was done by Denise, David, Barbara. But it is this fundamental idea, trying to make sure that subjects are relevant, memorable, and therefore transferable. And then a lot of work goes into trying to make sure that the progression has a structure to it. There is a logic. And the only other slide is just to mention that if you want some more sort of phrases, this was the original idea of Wiggins McT, that the big ideas would serve as what's called a sort of conceptual Velcro, and that was sticking things together, or if you like a different metaphor, they act as a linchpin or they provide lenses. Let's see. I think that's enough from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So what we wanted to do was to bring together people from the world of science education with the people from religious education and see if we could do something together, something collaborative, something new, something people had rarely tried before, particularly in terms of a whole term of work that could be offered to schools to take up and to be taught by the RE and science departments together. So there were 2 big ideas that we selected from science with the help of our science colleagues, and 2 ideas we selected from our big ideas for our RE program. And you can see them there. Diversity of organisms living and extinct as a result of evolution, a big idea in science. Scientific methods and theories developed as earlier explanations are modified to take account of new evidence and ideas. And then the ones we wanted from for religious education were taken from our big idea number 6, which is called the big picture, which relates to all of the major religions and philosophies of the world tend to have a big picture, a grand narrative, some big answers to all the big questions of life, the universe, and everything. And these were the 2 that we thought would be appropriate for this particular unit we were going to base around John T. Scott's trial. Religions and worldviews provide grand narratives of how and why the world is as it is, the big questions about the universe and humanity, and authoritative texts and traditions are interpreted in different ways. Key kind of things. If students can get hold of these ideas, we think we're getting somewhere with the young people that we're working with. Now, some of you will know these 6 big ideas that our team came up with. They're not the only big ideas that are possible in religious education. People have come up with other versions of this, but the people come up with something similar to this every time. And so we're not saying this is it, but we are saying here's one way in which you can choose big ideas that offer a way for teachers and planners to say, what are the key things about our subject that we really hope the children will get to understand our subject? And these will take us a long way with you, and it's starting to play out in practice now in classrooms across the country. Number 1, continuity, champions and diversity. Really important that teachers and children don't generalize too much about different religious and worldview believers. All Jews think this, Christian do this. This sort of generalization is challenged by this big idea, where there is continuity, sure, in different religions, but there is change. And most importantly, diversity. Diversity within traditions as well as across them. Number 2, words with beyond. We really love this one because this is about all the great art, music, poetry, architecture, all the great creativity of the world's religions. Gets neglected a little bit in some religious education services, to such an extent that RE today and NATRE, the National Association of Teachers of RE, have actually had to launch a prize for children called Spirited Arts and Spirited Poetry, encouraging children to offer artistic works and interpretations that will qualify for a prize. But, the whole thing about the way that people express their deepest convictions in a variety of ways, it's most important for children to understand. A good life. It's not just a moral and ethical dimension to things. That's important for this area of study. But also, what's the meaning of the word good anyway? I was just thinking that a couple of days ago, Ozzy Osbourne died. Now, I don't think anybody would claim that he led a morally perfect or ethically wonderful life, but did he have a good life? Maybe that's a subject for a good RE lesson. Number 4, making sense of life's experiences. Again, quite neglected in a lot of RE programs, but absolutely fundamental to most people who profess a religion or worldview. It's their experience that really counts. Not just the big things, like a big conversion experience or a wonderful peak experience or mystical experience that somebody might have, but also the little everyday things that people appreciate in their life. How do they make sense of them? And some of the, the ups and downs of life, the tragedies, the good things, how do we make sense of it? Children need to know about this. And that influence and power, we're going to think a little bit more about this tomorrow, I think, with AI, but this is about the interaction between religions and the states or powers within which they operate. So a really important way for children to understand what's happening in our world today. All of the big issues that you see on the news involve this influence and power kind of area. Doesn't get a lot of treatment in a lot of RE syllabuses. We think this is really important. And finally, the one that we used for our Scopes trial, the big picture, which Denise will talk a little bit more about as well. For each of these 6 big ideas, our team devised age-related statements so that we could see how children were making progress in the depth of their understanding of each of these big ideas. And that's all part of our program that we've presented on our website. So, having been put in touch with Marianne Cutler and Philippa Hulme, who's here today at the Association for Science Education, we've put together a complete scheme for schools that ideally could be taught cooperatively by the RE and science departments. There's a flexibility there, though, so that each part of the unit can be taught separately. And it begins with an activity for students who take on roles based on the original trial. And thanks to Ruth Marks, for supplying the initial set of role play cards for this. This is 11 to 14. We're talking about what we call Key Stage 3, 11 to 14. Though I think it could be done by certainly older students as well. So lessons 1 to 4, and all of these come complete with sets of resources as well for schools to be able to use. Complete 12 lesson set of lessons, pretty well spelt out for teachers to make use of. And the first engagement that we have for our students is to engage in a kind of role play of the original trial. Show a bit of the film, the old Spencer Tracy one preferably, and then get the children into roles whereby they play the characters that figured largely in the trial. And a lot of children can play parts of the jury and so on, and the court ushers, and there are lots of roles for everybody in the class. So that gets them engaged. And then I'm going to hand over to Philippa now, just to explain a little bit about how the science lessons followed on from there.
Thank you, Dave, very much. I just want to say it's been a real honour, real pleasure to work with Michael Reiss and Denise and Dave. And it's been really lovely to bring my own career in science education sort of back to my family background, because my father was an RS teacher for many years, and he chaired a SACRE committee in Bath and North East Somerset. And also both parents have been members of the Progressive Christian movement as well. So it's lovely to bring those two things together. But I'm very much an amateur when it comes to, well, complete amateur in terms of religious studies. Anyway, back to the science bit, coming on with this scheme of lessons. Have any of you been bitten by a bedbug? Hands up. Yes. Not nice. Okay. And it's really interesting. In the 1950s, people used sprays, I presume based on DDT, to kill bed bugs. But then the bed bugs, over several generations, grew thicker shells and became resistant to the sprays. The sprays didn't kill them anymore. So, why might this be? Here are two possible science explanations put forward by different people at different times. Just have a read of the two explanations and just think about which one scientists, the evidence shows that now is correct. And you're doing now what we would ask the students at school to do, because they will have some prior knowledge of evolution by this stage. So we're getting them, usually actually get them to talk to their neighbours about this, but I'm very aware of my 13 minutes, and that's, I need to start my timer. So, of course, it's the one on the right, which is the Darwinian explanation. This one mirrors the Lamarck's explanation, whereby a giraffe's neck will get longer, for example, as it reaches to the top of trees. Not quite right. And this one of Darwin's on the right-hand side, which is that the changes from generations, the survival of the fittest. Okay. And you'll notice there that what the students are doing, we're asking them to compare and to think about two science explanations. The next part of the lesson is thinking about eyes and to compare the views of a theologian writing in 1805, William Paley, and who was basically saying, well, just as a watch is too complicated and functional to have sprung into existence by accident, living things must also have purposely been designed. And Darwin was considering those ideas, and in 1859, when The Origin of Species was published, he thought about that. He said, well, at first glance, the evolution of the eye by natural selection seems completely absurd. But there are many sorts of eyes. He's observed animals with different sorts of eyes. And he thinks, well, maybe complex eyes could have evolved from simple eyes by natural selection if each change along the way had proven to be useful. And he thought, well, the key to that is to find evidence, to find intermediate eyes which show a pathway from simple to complex. And we can now look at, and in the lesson, we've encouraged students to look at different eyes along the evolutionary route. And this is where an idea about science comes in. The idea of evolution is an idea of science, but now we're thinking of an idea about science. Where does scientific evidence come from? Have a think about that question as we just look at these eyes. So that's the first one, just some light-sensitive cells. We'd encourage students to think about how might that be useful to that single-celled organism. The second step, in a multicellular organism, perhaps several light-sensitive cells got together in one place. That means the organism can detect light and find out where it comes from. That's going to benefit the organism. The third step, gradually, some creatures, like this arrowworm, a type of plankton, evolved a tiny depression called a pigment cup for light-sensitive cells. And that animal can detect where light comes from. It can sense movement. So that's going to be beneficial. And we move through to various steps getting more complex. And in all cases, the evidence for these steps in evolution come from looking at evidence from creatures that are alive today, or in the case of the trilobite there, from that fossil creatures that were alive very, very many years ago. And then we bring this up to date. And then the second part of the lesson, or a separate lesson, students are given some quite detailed information, some quite detailed summaries of scientific research from actual scientific papers, all of which have been published very recently within the last, 3 years. And we ask them to scrutinise that research on evolution. And the purpose of doing this is for students to get experience of another idea about science. As technology for gathering evidence improves, so scientists can collect evidence that years earlier might not have been possible. Okay, so I'll just tell you a little bit about each of these ideas. But in the classroom, students would be interrogating this research themselves, or the simplified summary themselves. Okay, and doing that by addressing various questions and discussing in their groups. So one of them is actually some artificial selection. So some scientists, somewhere in America, I'm afraid I can't remember where, had lots of tanks of fish, these Atlantic silverfish, and they had several thousands, and every generation they took out from one of the tanks the smallest fish from the other tank, the largest fish. And over the generations, the ones from which the smallest fish had been removed ended up being larger over the generations and vice versa. And that evidence was possible, part of it, obviously, the creation of the experiments in the scientists' imaginations, but also the existence of very accurate digital electronic scales. Fish teeth. So fairly recently, scientists or people have found big piles of teeth from fish piled up by ancient fires. I thought, well, why did those fish teeth, why was there a big pile of those fish? And they thought, well, maybe it's because people were cooking the fish and they discarded the teeth on this pile. So they used this relatively new technique, X-ray powder diffraction, to analyze the fish teeth, compare them with fish teeth from teeth they know haven't been cooked, and to work out that, yes, probably those teeth come from fish that have been cooked. And improved nutrition, of course, might have led to the development, human evolution, and the further development of the brain. And again, we're obviously appealing to 11 and 12-year-olds here with fossilized dinosaur feces or poo, and huge amounts of evidence. Scientists found huge amounts of evidence in the Central European basin, mainly what is now Poland, and they analysed vomit from dinosaur, fossilized poo from dinosaur, and what they found in that was they could work out what different dinosaurs had eaten. And so they could actually create food webs or work out what food webs might have been in existence in dinosaurs very many years, many years ago. So that's an opportunity to look at modern evidence, to realise that science is a developing body of knowledge. It's not fixed in the past, something to perhaps which students might contribute. It's also showing that scientists need to be a bit creative. You need to think about the idea of, analysing your dinosaur poo to find out what the dinosaur ate. Okay. Finally, I just want to move on to these vegetables, which is why the vegetables are here. And I was absolutely amazed to find that all of these vegetables, from the cabbage to the pak choi to the kale to the broccoli, all evolved from one particular species, from the wild mustard plant. And I was absolutely amazed to find that out. And these were, of course, produced by selective breeding. So, to find to produce kale, breeders would have found the individual wild mustard plants with the biggest leaves and bred from them. And over generations, we ended up with curly kale. Broccoli, it's the flower buds. Okay, so breeders found wild mustard plants with the biggest buds. They bred from those, and eventually, over many generations, we ended up with broccoli. And you might think, well, what's the point of doing that? What's the point of getting students to talk about vegetables and to work this out for themselves? Well, of course, the argument is that if artificial selection can lead to changes in organisms over generations, a bit like those fish we were just looking at, then it's reasonable to assume also that changes resulting from natural selection are also possible. Okay. So another further bit of evidence, another opportunity for students not only to learn the ideas of science, but to learn about the ideas about science. And that's the sort of the science bit in a nutshell. It would take place probably over about 2 lessons. There's a lot of opportunity for students to discuss, to think, to activate their prior learning, to think critically, and, really to develop some of those critical thinking skills that are valuable in all of education as well. I'll leave you there. I'm 1 minute short. And back to Dave. And by the way, if anyone's going home tonight, please take please. Oh, yeah.
I must say I'm very impressed by the timekeeping of my colleagues. And it's been a huge pleasure to work with you, especially across the subjects, which we tend not to do so often. And I've been able to relive my more than half a century ago A-level biology and qualification technically as a science teacher. So I haven't actually, because that was my second subject long ago when I trained as a teacher, but I haven't taught any science since about 1976. It was lovely to be brought up to date. And so my job is to tell you a bit more about the RE section of our unit, which means I'll whiz past to the end of the science bit onto the RE bit. Give it there. There we are. And probably most people know this, but RE has changed quite a lot in the last 100 years, since 1925. And at least it has in this country and in the selection of other countries, mainly Scandinavian countries, South Africa. There's been massive changes in RE, although in other places not so much, and possibly going backwards. I'll leave you to think about that. But one of the biggest things that happened just before my involvement in the subject was in the late 60s and early 70s, a massive change. It's sometimes hard for people to realise what a change this was from the non-denominational Christianity that was taught in schools before that to a non-confessional and multi-faith curriculum. So it was it wasn't just a change of content in that instead of just doing Christianity, we were doing a whole range of traditions, but also a change of approach. You weren't there to encourage the children to get involved with the church. You were trying to understand a whole range of different religious traditions. And as a young teacher, it was such a relief to go into this new and exciting world of RE. The next big change, well, we hope it will be a change, was the Commission on RE in 2016 to 18. And it's lovely, Eleanor, to see one of my fellow commissioners here on that committee. We brought out a report suggesting that we might change the name of the subject to Religion and Worldviews. For a start, the word religious education always sounds as if you're trying to make everybody religious, doesn't it? So even today, people think that's what you're trying to do. So we suggested religion and worldviews, and this has become worked on since then as the worldviews approach to RE that was inclusive, especially now that the sociologists of religion tell us that in England, at least, the number of people identifying as non-religious is outweighing, just slightly gone over the number of people identifying as religious, whatever they mean by that when they tick a box. So we wanted an RE that was inclusive of both religious and non-religious students. So the child that says, well, why do I have to do this? I don't believe in God, miss. That's not the point. So we're looking at organised worldviews, religious and otherwise, personal worldviews. And by worldview, we don't mean a worked out philosophy of life necessarily, but that everybody has a general approach to life, certain assumptions you carry with you, and the associated emotions and behaviour. And Big Ideas for RE project happens at the same time as the Commission on RE was working. And it's been both an influence on this wider worldviews approach to RE, and also we see ourselves as part of it. So, as Dave mentioned, we chose the Big Idea 6 as relevant to this project on scopes, because BI6 deals with the grand narratives that seek to explain what life's all about and give meaning to life. And most, if not all, religious traditions and equivalent non-religious worldviews have this picture. And especially in religions based on a sacred text and one holy book, it's very, very important to look at genres of literature and interpreting text. And especially where this sacred text is the ultimate source of authority. Yes, it may be, but what does it mean? How do we understand it? And so my other A levels, as well as biology, were religious studies and English. So I feel I'm in my comfort zone with all of this. So one thing that I thought, I'm just summarising really some of the issues that we bring up in our section, that it's really important to distinguish between believing in creation and creationism. And a lot of students find it difficult to see the difference. They think it's the same thing. But the majority of beliefs in creation are not creationists in the modern sense in which we're using it. And so we do quite a bit on creation and creationism. And also, because it's drawing upon a wide range of religious traditions and non-religious traditions, to stress the diversity of creation beliefs. There's this endless sort of binary thing: do you believe the Bible or Darwin? But that's not all there is. And around the world there are huge range of ideas and stories and beliefs about where things came from, where humans came from, and it's useful to look beyond those Western views. And there's also a huge diversity of creationists, even just within creationist views. It's not just young Earth creationism, believing in 6-day creation of the world, taking it literally, as people say. And also something that I'm very interested in RE is looking at traditions like Buddhist traditions, Jain traditions, for whom creation isn't really an issue. And it's great to stand back and think, from this debate and think, this isn't an issue here. And there are religious traditions it's good to share with children where creation isn't important, or it didn't need to happen, or it happens all the time, so it's like no big deal, or, it's in some sense illusory anyway. But those new views and opinions are very, very interesting to explore. And one thing that struck us, Dave and I were lucky enough this a long time ago now, as I keep saying about everything, as you find out as you get older. 21 years ago, it was going to be a year off, our belated gap year, traveling around the Americas, but we ended up with 6 weeks. But we did spend a fortnight in Tennessee and surrounding areas, and we visited Dayton, Tennessee, and we were shown around the courtroom and where it all happened, and by somebody who actually was old enough to his relative knew the people who were involved in when he was younger. He knew the people who his uncle. Jury. It was on the jury. And one thing that was brought home to us is that it wasn't just a fixed belief in the inerrancy of verbal inerrancy of scripture. It was also a real and genuine concern that accepting evolution meant replacing Christian values of love and compassion with a selfish and ruthless idea of the survival of the fittest. And that's the way that humans could behave. And that they were not worried about nothing was proved, a decade and a half later, with the Nazis in Germany and the idea that there are eugenics and superior and inferior forms of people, and that the inferior forms need to be exterminated for the good of the future. The list of people, but also including those with disabilities, and if you're gay or Jewish or Jehovah's Witness or political enemies, and etc. But we explored this idea of social Darwinism in the unit, and the need to challenge this narrative of superior and inferior types of human being. And stress the values of, dare I say, diversity, equality, and inclusion. So it just so happened that Chris McCausland, the comedian who's also blind, happened to win Strictly Come Dancing that time. We thought, yes. And so we've got Chris McCausland versus Hitler on the slide there, because to value everybody, everybody, we can't say this category of person is somehow inferior and we need to keep them out of further human evolution. The other thing about the worldviews approach is it's not just studying other people's worldviews. Sometimes RE students, even students who love RE, think it's learning about what other people think. These fascinating things that these people over there think this and do this, and it's lovely to go and visit their temples, and but it's kind of them over there. It's not me, because I'm not religious. So part of the worldviews is looking at students' own worldviews. And if you've not seen it, there's a brilliant short film called Nobody Stands Nowhere that was made by the Theos organisation. That's the word I was looking for. It's well worth looking that up, because it points out that we're all coming from somewhere, even if we don't think we are. And it's important to note that students aren't just little sort of empty pots waiting for us to fill their heads with facts. They come from where they come from, with their own existing ideas and feelings and approaches to life, and it can affect their learning. You can't, in all subjects, not just RE, not just in science, that their worldviews will affect how much and how they are able to losing the word, able to access, that's the word, able to access what they are being taught. So I think it's teachers' responsibility, not just RE teachers, but RE teachers will probably do a lot of this, to help students reflect on their own worldview. Why do you think the things that you think and feel the things that you feel? And where did it come from? And we've all got stuff stuck in our heads. It amazes me what's stuck in my head sometimes. I think, where on earth did that come from? From your family, from your upbringing, from your friends, increasingly from social media, from wherever. Where do the ideas you take for granted come from? And especially to think about sources of authority and provenance of knowledge. Where does this come from? And can it be trusted? Interrogate this. And so-called knowledge, who says, why? And has it got scientific evidence for it, or what other sort of evidence might we be looking at? And questions of authority, who says this is true, and who says this is true? I'm all right for time as well. We're doing good today. So we've got lots of activities for the young people to do. It's not just talk, and probably the shortest one is one that we might have time to have a look at some point. Yeah. But maybe I'll get to the end, and then if we have a bit of time before questions, we can do a little. So basically, you can see along the bottom there some labels. I hate labels and isms because it's always more complicated than that. But labels for views on the creation-evolution debate, and we've called them atheism or scientism, agnosticism, theistic evolution, because we haven't done a lot on a whole range of different traditions, and we didn't know which religions the students that were doing it would have studied. We've called it generally non-theistic religious or spiritual worldview, such as Buddhism, young earth creationism, old earth creationism, and intelligent design creationism. And the 7 characters and quotes from the 7 characters, and then the simple, have you been listening to what we've been doing? Can you match the label with the person? So we could do that maybe in a bit. But that's a very, very simple, just a kind of revision exercise of, can you actually say what that person was trying to say? Finally, with my bit, and then we'll have time for questions and or activity. Why do we think scopes is still important? Why do students today need to know about something that happened 100 years ago? Because these issues are still continuing. Number one, there are still people fighting this out, much to others of a surprise. But these issues are still continuing. And Dave mentioned that it could be seen as the start of what we call culture wars, in the sense of media-fueled encouragement to take up binary positions and abuse opponents. So, yeah, the media builds these things up. It makes for clickbait, doesn't it? And there's this amazing, this bloke said this ridiculous thing. And we have encouragement to just take sides and then write horrible things on social media about this terrible person, their evil opinions, and all this awful hate speech that people have been subject to, that makes it, people don't want to put their head above the parapet and become a politician, because you immediately get all this abuse. So this binary business, which side are you on, the Bible or evolution? And choose sides, Darwin or God. It doesn't make for much progress, really. And so I think we need to challenge this binary and this idea that you must totally abuse and dismiss the person who takes up a different viewpoint from you. And religion and science today, there are still many issues that we're still talking about in the relationship between religion and science. So it goes on. Debates about, more generally, about what should be in the school curriculum are still very, very live all over the world. Here in the UK, our current government is having a curriculum review, and what will come out of that will be very interesting. We're hoping you're right, Michael, and big ideas might be influential. We hope we've got some key people whispering in the right ears, but who knows? But watch this space for especially for RE, because as you may know, RE is not in the national curriculum that was invented in 1988. It's organised locally, and that's in many places not working anymore. Some places it's working really well. But what is going to happen with RE in the new curriculum? And in the USA, each state is having its own sort of traumatic debate about what's happening here. And Rex is the person to wave your hand. Rex is the person to talk about what's happening in various states and some of the horrors you were telling me about what's happening in Oklahoma at the moment. You'd think 100 years it never happened. So what happens? What should, it's vital, isn't it? What is it? We can't teach children everything, and a lot of stuff they're going to just be able to find out anyway by clicking the button. So what do we need? And that's why we think that the big ideas is a way of not focusing on all these little facts and figures that you can find out from the technology. And it's a way of thinking, what is it that let's focus on what we really need to use this short time we've got with the children and young people. What's really important to leave them with? What do we want them to be able to take away from their education in all subjects, not just RE or science? So that is basically where I'm going. So we've got about 8 minutes to add. Well, you give those out and people can have a look at them, but we can also think about questions more generally for all 4 speakers. So, I don't know if Michael and Philippa, you want to come back and have a seat, and we're open to questions, comments. So,
I'm thinking of questions.
Yeah, and while you're thinking of a question, you can have a look, see if you can do the exercise.
Shut up, ladies. As well.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I'm supposed to be sharing this. Yes. So questions, time for questions, about 8 minutes. Oh, that's good. Ed will bring you a microphone. You might think you don't need it, but some of us do.
Thank you. Philippa, this is probably a question for you, but others might be able to chip in. A lot of people that are skeptical of evolution, they're kind of okay with development in species over time. The sticking point is the jump from apes to humans, what's the kind of latest scientific thought? Did we evolve from apes? Is there still a missing link? What knowledge do we need to know to answer these questions?
So, the overwhelming consensus, as I'm sure you know, among virtually all academic biologists, is that today's apes and humans, which are classified as one of the great apes, share a common ancestor, which would itself be classified as a great ape. So, in everyday language, about 5 to 7 million years ago, roughly, we began to separate from something which looked pretty much like the bonobos, which are one of the two species of today of chimpanzees. And that, it's difficult. It's not quite as certain in science, I wouldn't think, as something like gold is a separate element from lead, because there are certain things that are utterly inconceivable not to be the case, gold being a separate element from lead. But it is absolutely rock solid, acknowledged, accepted. The trouble with science, of course, is being a science educator in school, is there were times in the past when people just thought things were rock solid and certain, and then they get overturned. And one of the things we don't do very well in school education is allow students to realize there are different degrees of robustness of science. So I wouldn't be able to say mainstream theory of evolution, and your point is absolutely 100% in a mathematical sense. You can't really quantify it, but it's way over, almost at the 100%.
Anybody else should nail that? Next question.
Thank you very much. I'm on our local sacre and also going to schools to talk about non-religious worldviews, primarily humanism. I would just say that I have trouble getting people to say religious and non-religious worldviews rather than religion and worldviews. I think it's really important to get that terminology right. Otherwise, it looks like, the non-religious are the worldviews are sort of separate. 72% of school leavers will have no religion, and very few of them gain a religion after that. So teaching people that being good is related to belief in God is really not doing them any favors. And it's very important that non-religious worldviews are taught at a very early stage. Can I ask another question or make another point?
That was a question.
Don't you agree is the question? Okay. So the other thing is, in this first column by Tara, it says, I don't believe in God, but I do believe that there is a spiritual purpose in life. Sure, we all feel senses of transcendence. They come from a particular part of their brain. I'm a neurologist. But this goes beyond what science can demonstrate. Well, I mean, spirituality and transcendental experiences has been studied, since William James and Alistair Hardy and others people looking at the phenomenology and the neuroscience and neurochemistry of transcendental experiences is very well studied. So I think it's a bit, I don't think that's a very good representation of the atheist evolution.
Anybody want to comment on Tara? Who's Tara? Liberty is nice.
Okay, so these are all mixed stuff, of course. So you've got to work out which position at the bottom represents Tara. So yes, you're right. She's not a representative of atheist evolution. It's a game for children. No, to be beyond most adults. So which is Tara then of those descriptions?
Anyone has a guess? Yes. So one minute.
Sorry, thank you. Hi, my question is about, I'm not quite clear how the big ideas fits in with everything else that's going on in RE. Are you coming up with a program of study that you're going to publish, like a Natry resource, or are you contributing to what the national curriculum of RE would be like? are you one of many voices, or do you want to be the main voice?
Yes, to all of those questions, I think. Yes, we are producing a whole range of resources and materials right from from 4-year-olds through to 18. So we've got a near complete collection of exemplars. It's not really a syllabus as such in terms of a logical progression all the way through, making sure that all the different religions and worldviews are covered, but it's certainly an exemplar of how that might be done. And as Michael says, with big ideas in science education, and the whole idea of big ideas in different subjects taking on a kind of power of its own, such that in Western Australia, I believe, the whole curriculum is built around big ideas in every subject of the curriculum. And they have textbooks on big ideas in those subjects, apart from one. You can probably guess which subject that is, religious education. So we've done that in this country with our small team, and a huge number now of teachers, advisors and other RE professionals who've actually helped us to produce lesson plans that cover every age group in school now. So we've got all of that going. That's all on our website, bigideasforre.org. And so all of that can be found right away. Now, in terms of our influence more broadly, we've been working with a number of different local authorities with their syllabus reviews. So, for example, in Yorkshire now, the local authorities in Leeds, Bradford, Calderdale, Kirklees, 2 of the Manchester boroughs, Oldham and Tameside, Leicester City and Leicestershire, some of the London boroughs also interested, are revising their agreed syllabuses to work with big ideas for RE. The other way that we've been influential already, as Denise was indicating, was through the Commission on Religious Education, and Big Ideas was influential in the report that important group made, and that has in turn fed through to the work that the Religious Education Council is doing in recommending religion, what they're calling a religion and worldviews approach to the subjects. Now, with this whole curriculum review going on, we've also had representations from Big Ideas and from the Religious Education Council and many other voices as well, trying to influence how that might play out in the whole curriculum, but in relation to religious education in particular. So, we're working on many fronts. We are one voice among many still, and that's fine. It's one of the perhaps strengths of strength and weakness perhaps of religious education, that there are many, disparate voices speaking about how the subject should develop. But yeah, we're working on it, Ruth. So it is a case of watch this space, isn't it?
Yes. Can I just go back to your first comment, which was about mix it is it religions and worldviews or religion and worldviews? And looking at Eleanor, we talked about this for a very long time in core, and we were very definite it was religion singular, indicating the sort of general field of study, and worldviews plural, because religions we see as a subset of worldviews. So that's where you can talk about the worldviews approach or the religion and worldviews approach. But it's definitely religion singular. The need to interrogate, well, what do we mean by religion anyway, before we start to use religions. Use a religion. A religion can be, yes, they're under the... So that you have religious worldviews and non-religious worldviews, exactly. So basically we're agreeing with you. So there are religious worldviews, there are non-religious worldviews, and there are also an increasing number of people that are non-binary between the two. So research has been done by a friend of mine in Norway and in Scandinavia, and talking to young people in this country, there are a lot of people who don't want to tick the box religious, and they don't want to tick the box non-religious, because they sort of their own personal views dwell somewhere in between, or above or below, or just doesn't fit. They don't like the categories. So I think this is so we've got religious people who I'd say I'm religious, people who say I'm not religious, and they both mean different things, but lots of different things by that. And then there's people who say I refuse to be categorized in either of those because of the implications people will draw from what we've said.
Sorry, I'm going to be really cruel now and cut you off. I know you're dying to ask questions, but you've got a chance out there over tea to ask. But you'll realise what a crack team there is here. I'm given such a short time to speak, but thank you very much for all that lies behind this and for your contribution today. And no doubt you'll get to quiz them later on. So big round of applause to them. Time to stretch your leg, and a quarter of an hour before our next session. And time also, I was going to auction these off, but you've time to grab a vegetable if you're desperate for something for your Sunday lunch. Thanks you again. Right. We will convene in exactly quarter of an hour. Thank you. Thank you very much.